if we can help you with that topic. So the agenda, I'll do a very brief introduction in terms of myself and Kingfisher Lighting. We'll look at, first of all, why planning matters, who ultimately decides on or makes decision on planning, so the local planning authority, what their requirements are, what they'll be looking at, how we then meet those requirements, and then we'll also touch on retrofits, which are a bit of a grey area, before summarising and then answering any questions that you might have at the end. So a little bit about myself. So I've been doing this for over 12 years now. In that time, delivered hundreds of sports lighting projects, many of which would be hockey pitches, and been through this planning stage, put planning for applications together. My role as business development manager is to sort of help people through that process, and from initial inquiry through to delivering of the project, if you like, hand holding. And I've been working with England. I've put here England Athletics, England Hockey, as well for over 4 years now. So a bit about Kingfisher Lighting. So we've established in 1988. So we've been doing this a long time. Started as an electrical contractor installing lighting. I'll just go through some of the key dates. So in 2017, we were acquired by Luceco Group, and that's important because Luceco Group are a British-based lighting manufacturer. They have their own R&D team, and they actually developed and produced the light fitting, the sports-specific light fitting which is what we use today. In 2023, we were turning over 18 million, and we sit in 2026, we sit around about £20 million or just shy, in terms of turnover. We've got a nice new headquarters up in the centre of the country in Mansfield, which we keep a stock of fittings and masks so we can move quickly in terms of delivery of projects. We have around 99 employees, which make up product development, technical, sales, marketing, lighting design team. So we can try and keep as much of that in-house as we possibly can. We try not to rely on subcontractors too much, and the designs and planning proposals we all put together are kept in-house. So why does planning matter? So sports lighting, as you can imagine, can be highly controversial. We're often dealing with very tall masts with big floodlights producing a lot of light. So understanding how that planning process works and what's involved and its impact on the residents, surrounding area, ecology, etc., is really important. If we don't get that right, then often planning conditions can be harsh, or there's delays, or ultimately you can be refused. So who makes these decisions? It's done by the local planning authority. They are a local governing body. They have their own local plans that they'll look at in terms of residential developments and things like that, that they want to insist that every planning application abides by. They have their own rules on what they want to have a look at. There is a general framework, but the local planning authority will dictate ultimately how they want that information presented. And ultimately, the key bit is any unauthorized development, such as sports lighting, they can enforce closing down the facility or turning off the lights in this instance. Within the local planning authority, every planning application will be presented to a planning officer. And what they'll be looking at is making sure that the planning application sits within the general local plan of the area. They'll review all the reports, so the lighting design reports, any surveys like BAT surveys, etc. They'll consider the impact on the surrounding area, on the residents. They'll also manage objections. They'll act as an intermediate between the applicant and those that are objecting, to formulate a discussion, any additional meetings that may be required, and ultimately make the recommendation on terms of any of the recommendations they would like to see the planning application, or whether they approve it or refuse. So what is it that they're looking at? What are the requirements? So one of the most difficult things about planning application is no two local planning authorities are the same. The requirements for one are not necessarily the same for another. So there's no one size fits all, which can make it a bit of a challenge. So, but generally speaking, you're going to need full planning application if we're looking at installing new columns, if we're increasing the column heights, if the lighting levels are going to increase significantly, or if we're extending the hours of use. Retrofits we'll touch on later on, but they're, like I said, they're a bit of a grey area. So the planning officer will want to see an impact assessment. So they want to know what guidelines, what the lighting guidelines are for the pitch. Why are we lighting it to that level? So in this, we refer to the England Hockey or FIH guidelines typically when we're talking about hockey. They'll look at what's called the Institute of Lighting Professional Guidance Notes. So basically, there is a guide in term which says how much a light spill is allowed in a particular area, and that's what they're going to refer to. And the way they decide that is they categorize each area in a particular zone from E0 to E4. And I'll touch a little bit more on that on the next slide. They'll want to look at lux spill contours, how much vertical spill, obtrusive lights, glare effectively. And then in cases where we're looking at retrofits, how it compares to what's currently there. So if we look at the zones, so this is taken from the ILP guidance notes. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I just want to make you aware that depending on where the hockey pitch is based will dictate how much spill is allowed in that area. So in an E0, these are highly protected areas. We don't ever light anything in these areas. These are very remote areas, all the way through to E4, which is your sort of inner city town areas where there's already lots of light and noise around. So the crucial thing to bear is, so in these areas, the restrictions are really high. Down here, the restrictions are much lower. So typically, when we're looking at planning applications for hockey pitches, we're sort of in this E3 suburban area. You may get some in a rural area or inner city, but generally speaking, we're normally working in an E3 zone. And the other thing to bear in mind is just because you're in a rural area doesn't necessarily mean it's harder to get planning for light. Often, although the restrictions are much tougher, there are far fewer houses and they tend to be much further away from the pitch. Often E4 in terms of light spill can be much more challenging because although the restrictions are much more lenient, the houses, there's many more of them and they're much closer to the pitch. So often these can be more of a challenge than, say, a rural area. So the planning officer, they'll also want to consider when the light's going to be on. So can we get to the 10 p.m. switch off, or do we have to look at a 9 p.m.? Well, do we have to look at a reduced usage on the weekend? So have the lights turned off sooner on holidays? Do we limit how often you can have the lights on at, say, a match standard, that highest output? Or, can they be dimmed when you're just training, or if it's used for other sports such as football, for example? And it can often be that hours of usage is more contentious than the actual amount of light. The other thing is the impact during the daytime. So what do the columns look like? How many are there? What height are they? So they typically come in a galvanized finish, but do they want them painted black or possibly a dark green? And how that impacts the skylines from the surrounding residents. Is it in a heritage or conservation area which has a special considerations? We've got a classic example of this. Many years ago, I did a job for Eton College, and on the planning application there, they insisted on some of the masts being telescopics in order to bring the height of the column down below the fence line. And the sole reason for that was so that the residents didn't have an obscured view of Windsor Castle. So often these things come up and they're very much site specific. So we just have to bear that in mind. So a big consideration, ecology. I'm not going to touch on that too much in terms of this presentation, but just be aware. So ecology typically means bats, and they are a protected species in this country, and they are far less resilient to light than humans are. So often they're much stricter in terms of what is allowed if bats are detected in the area. Generally speaking, if the pitch is near a watercourse or a wooded area, then the chances of the planning officer will want a bat survey. The crucial thing to understand here is that bats generally hibernate in the winter, so bat surveys have to be done between May and August, which is really important. Why we're looking at, if you are looking at planning applications or installations in time for the end of the next season, it's important that we start getting these looking at these planning applications now, because a lot of this will take time in order to get them in time for the new season. The other key consideration here is the bats are susceptible, particularly to blue light. So often there is a restriction on the color temperature that we can use. So we can't use all the colors of the spectrum, which has can be problematic, especially if we're trying to meet those FIH guidelines. So with lighting comes increased usage, which is what we're trying to do. So while we're trying to light the pitch so we can use it in the evenings when it gets dark. And with increased usage comes increased noise, increased in terms of traffic flow, so where the car's going to park, antisocial behaviour. So these are things that the planning officer needs to consider along with the lighting. And then again, when it comes to retrofitting, how is there any benefit in terms of the reduction of energy usage, carbon footprint, which will all go in your favour of the application if we're reducing that? But like I said, that'll only apply on existing installations. So now we've got an idea of what the planning officer, local planning authority will need to consider. How do we then meet those requirements? So they're going to want drawings. So these are all things that we can provide and help you with. So that means site plans typically want an OS map rather than just a Google Earth image. They want drawings of the masts and the fittings, technical details. They'll want a lighting design, so they'll want to see the amount of light spill on the residential area, and we'll look at an example of that in a bit. Where necessary, they'll also need to put the ecology and bat reports, which is something that we don't do, but we can help you find people that do, and then put together planning and design aspects. So we basically summarise in detail everything that we're going to do within the planning application, and this is what Joe at England Hockey often looks at when looking at planning applications as well. So how do we minimise the light spill? So really important that we use a sport-specific luminaire. We make sure that we do a design that maximizes the aiming of light onto the pitch and minimizes the amount of spill off it. We make sure that we use the correct column heights and the layout, so where we position those columns in order to avoid and also avoid overlighting, so making sure we design it to the right specification. So this is a luminaire that we use. This is one of our sport fittings. So some of the key features that the planning officer will be looking at is the fact that it's called what we call flat to ground capability, I should say. So what we mean by that is the floodlight is pointing down. We're not elevating it. So all the light is going onto the pitch, not into the sky. It comes with an integrated count and with some additional shielding we can add if necessary. It has a low profile, so we're not trying to put up a big sail up on the top of the mast. We're going to try and keep the loading as small as possible, which means we can use smaller masts, smaller foundations, etc. And we've got various different optics we can use to ensure we get sharp cutoff, different beam types, medium wides, narrows, etc. So we're not relying just on one side. So got the luminaire and the details of some of the benefits that has. Then we need to consider how we're going to position that relative to the hockey pitch. So really important consideration is the height. So on the right here, we've got our column, and what we want to do is maximize this darker blue light, which is the useful light going onto the pitch, is where we want it. What we want to do is minimize this lighter blue, which is the light spill off it, which is what so we're trying to keep that as little as possible. And the way we do that is we want to use a mast type that means we can keep the fitting pointed down, which is that flat to ground. So not like this. So as we lower the columns, we have to start tilting the fittings up like this, to get the light into the middle of the pitch, which is then we have problems in terms of light spill. Also important consideration is the number of masts we use. So the more masts generally means we can give a tighter control of spill. And we've got more lighting points in which to use. It also means we can use zoning, so we can potentially use third pitch switching if we only want to light a third of a pitch rather than half pitch. And we can distribute the light a bit more easily, or not have to light the whole of the pitch. Fewer columns. Obviously, there's advance in terms of daytime impact potentially, as well as cost. However, we've got fewer points in terms of controlling the light spill, and it restricts in terms of what you can do in terms of switching and controls. And then the other thing consideration is positioning. So we've got here no two sites are the same. So we need to consider whether there's trees obscuring things. If there's houses, particularly down the one side, that are particularly difficult, then we can maybe use that to our advantage, or with the trees or hedge or whatever, or try and keep it as tight as we can on the one side and maybe not so much on the other. So there's things like that that we need to consider, which is why it's important to do a site-specific design and not just a generic design. So now let's look at a typical lighting design. So this would form part of a planning application that we submit. So hopefully you'll recognize this as the hockey pitch here. We've got our 8 masts, so 4 down each side. We've got the lighting levels on the pitch, which is compliant with a 350 lux hockey pitch scheme. And then what the planning officer will be interested in is the lux spill, so the spill contours around it. And then these values, so we run the spill calculations on the road here, and these lovely big houses along the side over here. And what you should get with your lighting design is a table summarizing those spill calculations. So, which is what this is over here. So you'll see that we have classified this as suburban area, that E3, that typical example, and that dictates then how much light is allowed or is considered acceptable on those houses. So these are all the spill calculations along the road. So the value here we have to keep below is 10 in this example, and you can see we're all green. Green is good. Pass, pass, pass. We're keeping it within that 10 lux requirement. But it's not just lux that we have to consider. There's also something called luminous intensity, which is measured in candelas, and that's effectively how much of the light source, so glare, if you like, it can be seen from those residents. So again, the value is dictated by the area that we're in. Again, we've run the calculations and it's all pass. And then the other consideration is the road. So the amount of light on the road is not a bad thing. You know, the more light, the more it's lit up. That's a good thing. However, what we need to be conscious of is that we're not passing that glare onto the drivers, causing distractions for the drivers. So that's what these calculations is what they call threshold increment is about. And again, when we run all the figures on the road, it's all pass. So what we're trying to do is make it nice and easy for the planning officer to look at all the calculations, check the RP guidance notes, see that it all passes, and then so they can move on to the next thing. So numbers on a page are great. However, what does that look in practice? So this is an example. I appreciate it's not a hockey pitch, but it's a rugby install that we did last year. But it's a similar setup. So we've got 4 masts down each side, 8 masts in total, lit to 500 lux, which is what will be the equivalent of the Class 1 FIH specification. And what you can see is what we're trying to achieve here is this really nice cutoff down the side of it. So all the light is down onto the pitch. We've used the mast height. That means allows us to keep the fitting flat to the ground, and we keep the glare to an absolute minimum. And again, this is emphasised, this sharp cut up down the side of the pitch here, which is again the same principle applies with a hockey pitch. So part of the planning application, we also need to produce a design access statement. So this is where we consider the area that will make reference to the site itself and the surrounding area. Its proximity to residential properties. We talk about when we need the lights on with justification of why we need them on for that long, why we've chosen those column heights, and what that visual impact will be. Reference if it is in a particular heritage or conservation area, any special considerations associated with that. Why we've designed it to those levels. Details of the luminaire, and then any additional benefits, such as if we're applying dimming to help minimize the spill. So if you need the full output for match days, but 90% its training level is going to be a reduced lighting output and spill. So I'm briefly going to just touch on retrofitting. So back in the day when I first started out in the industry, retrofitting wasn't an issue. You could just go ahead and do it. Planning wasn't a consideration. So, however, that's increasingly not the case these days. So, Key considerations here are we're trying to reuse the existing infrastructure. So the same columns, positions are fixed. We can't play around with, and even if they're not in the ideal location. And we often have to work with existing planning conditions, which aren't necessarily a problem because generally we're reducing the amount of light spill, and demonstrate the positive impact on the environment. So that reduction in energy and carbon emissions. So so this is what we want to try and demonstrate as much as we can. So reduce spill, if possible, can we introduce dimming, which isn't necessarily possible with conventional metal halides, the existing setup. Um, Reduce energy consumption, carbon emissions, and emphasize that we're not changing the existing infrastructure. We're going to try and reuse. It's just the heads that we're changing. And I'll give you an example of where we've had success in the past with this. So this is an example. I appreciate it's a an athletics track, but the same principles applies. So I've used this example in terms of with an athletics track where we were able to demonstrate to the local planning authority that we were going to do an improvement, and as a result of that, they didn't need to do a full planning application. So on the left here, I'll just talk through briefly what we've got. So this was their existing metal halide system, which is, and then on the right is the LED retrofit. So on the left, light is being shown all over the place up into the sky, as well as onto the track. You can also see there's quite a lot of glare coming from these fittings, whereas on this side you can see obviously this very nice sharp cut off. So everything is pointing downwards again. We're not shining light up into the sky, so you get the view of the abbey much clearer, and the amount of glare is considerably less. And then the other thing, well, I've got this slide up just to make you aware that it's quite obvious, not necessarily a planning consideration, but you can see the color. This is where the color rendering, so your ability to pick up colors is much better with the LEDs. So you can see the greens on the grass especially show up much clearer. So this is one of the benefits of LED lighting. So just to summarize everything that we've just gone through today, so I appreciate it's quite a bit. So ultimately, the local planning authority wants to see that it complies with their local plans of what they have in terms of the surrounding area. They want to look at make sure that the spill is compliant with the ILP guidance. Have a look at its effect on the residential amenity, ecology, and that the design ultimately is proportionate to what you're going to use it for. So if you're going to use it for hockey, it's designed for hockey and nothing more, etc. Considerations. So first of all, if you are looking at new installation, when do you need planning by? So for example, like I say, if you're looking to a new installation in time for the beginning of the next season, then really we need to start looking at planning applications now to give you enough time. Best case scenario, you'll get a decision 2 months from when you put in an accepted application. However, in reality, it's more likely 3 months longer if there's objections and things that we need to put in place to minimise further things we need to put in place to minimise things like light spill, etc. If it's known to be a contentious area, it may be that we need a planning consultant to come on board, especially one that's familiar with the local planning authority that can help get that planning application through first time. You may also want to consider a pre-app, especially again if it's in a contentious area. And also, do we need to carry out ecology studies, so bat surveys, etc. And then with retrofits, specifically, first of all, do you need planning? It may be that the planning authority that you're dealing with say no. It tends to be in high affable, sort of densely populated areas. They tend to be a little bit more reserved and will insist on a full planning application. But again, until we engage with the local planning authority, we don't know. If they come back and say, no, you do need a full planning application, that's when we can emphasize the improvement, the benefits of converting to an LED system over the current system. And then finally, important to engage with England Hockey. And at this point, I'll introduce Joe, if you want to come back and just talk about your role within the planning application process.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, very quickly from us. I think everybody who's on the webinar at the moment is doing exactly what we need you to do. Is obviously engaged with England Hockey, whether it's a new build pitch or you're looking at installing lights on an existing pitch with no lights or retrofit. Generally, as part of the planning world and local planning authorities and our relationship with Sport England as statutory consultee, we will generally be consulted on any planning applications that land with that particular local planning authority. So I think any kind of just double checking, making sure that you're getting the right lux levels. If you need anything more technical, we've obviously got the relationship with Patrick at Kingfisher in terms of engaging and linking up with him in terms of some real technical support, or if needed, some kind of on-site lighting designs that I'm sure Kingfisher are happy to carry out. I think it's just really important that as a national governing body, we know what you're doing. And that's not from a policing, that's just making sure that you're getting the right specification and the right technical information. The last thing we want any site to do is spend a lot of money on a big capital project and then find out they've got the wrong lux levels, or you could have done something that could have either saved you money, or you could have installed some kind of dimming zoning operations as part of the original lighting installation, which obviously can help you on that site. So I think early engagement with us, anything that we can do to help, whether it's us as my team, and we have Gary Limbert who's on the call, and also Steph Bullen. So anything that we can do and help you around this lighting area, but also linking with our partner Kingfisher, we're here to help and obviously try and work with you through some of the challenges that planning can encounter. We like to think that most of them go through really smoothly, but I think it's just worth touching base with your national governing body and then anything we can do. So, yeah, I think everybody it pretty much is doing that. So thank you to all those that are on the call. Really, really helpful. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, so yeah, I appreciate we've overrun a little bit. So yes, that brings us to the end. So I'm happy to take any questions for those that want to hang on, or drop them in the chat, or drop me an email. I'll put my contact details on there so you can contact me direct on the website here. This is my mobile, or there's the generic England Hockey, which comes through to ourselves as well. So feel free to put them across. I'll open it back to Joe if they've got any questions in the chat. By all means, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. Yeah, Patrick, I did put some in which I've had recently received from clubs, but there's a couple on here that, oh, Matt's just dropping off. So great. Thanks, Matt. We'll send you the information. There's a question around existing mature and tall trees, which may be bat flight paths. How close can we go to the trees? This is a brand new pitch development.
So yeah, so this is going to be, if you suspect there are going to be bats in there already, the planning officer is likely to think the same. So this is where these bat surveys are really important. Off the back of the bat survey, it'll try and identify the bat route, and there'll be some recommendations of the ecologist in terms of how much spill will be allowed in that particular area. So the thing with, if they do find bats, it does make it a bit more it does make it more complicated, because they tend to put very high restrictions in terms of the amount of light spill, much greater than what us as humans, or residents will be able to cope with, if you like. So yes, the recommendation would be then, if you think that's going to be, it would be to maybe you could do a pre-app and just they may come back and insist that you do to confirm that you do need that bat survey. But my suspicion is, if you already suspect it, then they're going to insist on that bat survey as part of your application.
Brilliant. Thank you. You did allude to it a little bit earlier in your presentation, but what I did have a recent email around, is there an alternative to the 15-meter, which we typically in the FIH typically recommend, 8 columns, 15 meters high? Is there an alternative, lower, higher option for columns?
So yeah, so you're quite right. The vast majority of hockey pitch we do are use 850-meter mast, because that gives us the optimum in terms of keeping the fittings flat to ground, a nice equal distribution without going crazy on the budget. So just because that is what we normally do, isn't mean that we can't work to lower mast heights or different. Like I say, every site is slightly different. So yes, you can reduce the mast heights and still have a compliance scheme. The only thing to bear in mind is as we reduce those mast heights, that's when we have to start elevating the fittings, and that's where we can potentially have problems with light spill. So it's a bit horses for courses. So but yes, you I think we've done it as low as 12. When you get to about 12 meters, that's when we're really pushing the design in terms of the spill and what's achievable. But so I think 12 meters is probably the lowest we've ever done a hockey pitch in that I can remember.
Okay. Another one leading to a sensitive site was what enforcement mechanisms ensure lights are switched off or on time.
So yeah, so the easiest thing and simplest is like is to put in a time clock, which will automatically turn the lights off, and that might be part of a planning condition. That might be a planning condition that the planning officer insists on. A lot of it is down to the user and just switching it off. Time clocks are not expensive. It's very easy to put in, and it's a sort of a safety net, if you like, in terms of ensuring that the planning condition is met. Um, Normally, if it is a contentious area and the lights are left on beyond what was permitted for planning, a resident will call up and say you've forgotten to turn the lights off or something like that. So typically, to avoid that scenario, you would just put a time clock, which is a very easy, simple way of stopping that from happening.
Right. And then there's another one linked to a retrofit specifically is can you recycle the old metal halide fittings?
So Medvet, they do actually have so the lamps have some hazardous waste in them, so they have to actually be disposed of via what we call we skips. So there is so we have to be a little bit careful in terms of the lamps. The shells itself, there's no they aren't whether they can be recycled. They're normally made of steel or some aluminium, so you could potentially recycle them if you wanted to. If you could find it tends to be that the from a financial point of view, there's very little benefit to it, but there is potential to recycle some of the elements, if you like, of the fitting.
Brilliant. Has anybody else got any questions? Because what I'll do is I'll stop recording if there isn't any more coming through. So let me just